Hey everyone, welcome back to Eternal Archives, a place where we slow things down, breathe, and wander through the stories that history left behind for us. Before we begin, take a moment for yourself. Get comfortable, maybe dim the lights, and if you have a fan nearby, turn it on for that soft, steady hum in the background. When you're ready, let your shoulders loosen, let the noise of the day fade behind you, and allow your mind to drift into another time. Tonight, we step into the world of the 300 Spartans, warriors shaped by discipline, forged through hardship, and remembered for a stand that echoed across thousands of years. To understand the Spartans, you first need to understand the world they lived in. Ancient Greece was not a single nation, not a unified kingdom, and not a peaceful land held under one ruler. It was a collection of independent city-states, small, fiercely proud communities, each with its own laws, traditions, rivalries, and ambitions. Athens valued philosophy, debate, and wealth. Corinth thrived on trade and ships. Thebes fought for land and power. And Sparta, tucked away in the rugged region of Laconia, chose a path unlike any other. These city-states did not always see eye to eye. They argued, competed, and often fought one another. Each believed its way of life was the right one. Each distrusted the others in some way. Athenian culture saw Spartans as harsh and unrefined, too focused on discipline and too little on art. Spartans, in return, viewed the Athenians as soft, talkative, and distracted from what truly mattered: strength, order, and unity. Greece was a land full of brilliance, but also full of tension. Imagine standing on a hillside overlooking the patchwork of Greek lands below. Small farms, quiet villages, narrow dirt roads stretching through olive groves. Each city-state is close enough to see, but far enough to feel like its own world. The air carries the sound of distant voices, markets, and footsteps on stone. There is beauty here, but also a restless energy. Allies today might be rivals tomorrow. Peace could vanish at the strike of a bronze spear. Sparta, however, stands apart. Its walls are not adorned with carvings or marble. Its homes are simple. Its streets are quiet. Life here moves with purpose, not luxury. Everything about the Spartan way is intentional, shaped over centuries to create a community built not on wealth, but on strength and unity. A place where discipline is more valuable than silver, and honor is more permanent than stone. The Greeks themselves often said that Sparta was not like the rest of Greece, and they were right. While other cities chased trade, art, poetry, and philosophy, Sparta built something different, something rare. A society focused entirely on crafting citizens who could endure hardship, move as a single unit, and face threats without hesitation. A society that believed true freedom could only be protected by those strong enough to defend it. This contrast between the lively debates of Athens, the markets of Corinth, the proud cities of Boeotia, and the severe calm of Sparta shaped everything that was to come. And long before the famous battle at Thermopylae, long before Persia cast its shadow over the Greek world, the Spartans had already forged themselves into something extraordinary. Their story begins not with war, but with the land they inhabited, the values they held, and the simple truth that in a world filled with rivalries, Sparta chose to stand alone. Life in Sparta moved at a different rhythm than the rest of Greece. Other cities woke to merchants setting up stalls, musicians tuning instruments, and voices rising in busy marketplaces. Sparta woke to discipline. The sun had barely touched the rooftops when men and boys gathered in open courtyards, bodies already prepared for the first exercises of the day. There was no laziness here, no drifting through morning hours. Every moment served a purpose. The Spartan home reflected this mindset. It was simple, almost severe. No painted walls, no decorative pottery, no clutter to distract the mind. A cloak hanging on a wooden peg, a shield leaned against a wall, a single torch for light. Everything else was functional. It wasn't poverty, it was intention. The Spartans believed that comfort weakened the spirit, and that too much decoration distracted from what mattered. Imagine stepping into one of these homes at dawn. The air is cool against your skin. The floor is hard under your feet. There is no softness here, no warmth beyond what you provide yourself. The only sound is the quiet rustle of a cloak being tied and the distant thud of spear shafts striking the training grounds outside. Even the silence feels disciplined. From a young age, every Spartan learned to live with less. They ate simple meals, coarse bread, cheese, black broth, figs when in season. The focus was not flavor, but fuel. They wore simple clothing designed to last. They spoke little unless necessary. Words, like possessions, were not wasted. Despite their reputation as warriors, the Spartans did far more than train for war. They trained their bodies for everything: running, jumping, wrestling, and countless forms of athletics. Sports were woven into their identity, not simply for entertainment, but to shape strength, coordination, and endurance. A Spartan athlete was expected to move with precision, to compete with intensity, and to carry themselves with pride even in friendly contests. Picture yourself in a Spartan gymnasium, a dusty field surrounded by wooden posts and flat stones. The morning air is cool, but the bodies around you warm quickly as the drills begin. You feel the steady strike of your feet against the ground, the weight of your breath rising and falling as you run in formation. Sand kicks up beneath sandals as wrestlers collide, muscles tightening, bodies twisting with controlled force. There is no applause, no cheering, only the sound of effort and the calm focus of those watching. Women in Sparta trained as well, something almost unheard of in other Greek cities. they ran, they threw javelins, they boxed, they wrestled. Strong mothers created strong children, and Spartans believed the city itself depended on it. Visitors from other cities sometimes mocked this, but the Spartans didn't care. They valued strength in all their people. Discipline shaped every hour. Young boys learned not to flinch from pain, not to complain, and not to break formation. Older men trained beside them, reinforcing the expectation that growth never ended. Even the elderly remained active, leading rituals, advising the youth, and reminding the city what endurance looked like across a lifetime. Sparta's minimalism wasn't just about simplicity, it was about clarity. When you remove distractions, what's left is purpose. And in Sparta, that purpose was shared by everyone. From the youngest child to the oldest warrior, from the women who trained on the hillsides to the men who prepared for war, every person moved as part of a greater whole. In this environment, unity wasn't forced, it was natural, expected, required. A Spartan was never just an individual. They were a piece of a larger body, a single muscle in a single arm that moved as one. This foundation, the lifestyle, the training, the simplicity, created the mindset that would one day face the largest army the ancient world had ever seen. But long before they stood at Thermopylae, they built themselves here, in the dust of the gymnasiums, the silence of simple homes, and the discipline of a society that believed strength was not just physical, but lived. If daily life in Sparta shaped the body, the agoge shaped everything else. It was the core of Spartan identity, the system that turned children into warriors long before they ever held a real spear. Other Greek cities sent their sons to school to learn poetry, music, and philosophy. Sparta sent its sons into hardship. The agoge began at age 7. At that moment, a boy left the comfort of his home and entered a communal world where weakness had no place. He lived with others his age, slept on reeds he gathered himself, shared what little food they were given, and learned to rely on his group more than on any individual instinct. The goal was not cruelty, it was resilience. Imagine being 7 years old, stepping into a bare training hall for the first time. The floor beneath your feet is cold. The walls hold no decorations, no comforts, only the shadows of those who came before you. Older boys watch from the side, their expressions calm but stern. You feel the weight of expectation before anyone speaks a word. This is the beginning of your lifelong education, and you know it will not be easy. The boys were taught to endure hunger, cold, exhaustion, and discomfort. They learned to steal food not out of greed, but to sharpen their instincts. If they were caught, the punishment was not for stealing, it was for failing. Every lesson had a purpose. Every hardship held meaning. They memorized sayings, trained their voices to speak plainly and briefly, and learned to debate with sharp logic rather than long speeches. Physical training was constant, running, wrestling, sparring with wooden weapons, learning to maintain formation even when fear rose in the chest. But the agoge didn't just train bodies, it shaped minds. Boys were encouraged to think lightly of pain, to remain calm under pressure, and to value the needs of the group over their own comfort. Individual bravery meant nothing if it endangered the line. Discipline came first. One of the most important lessons in the agoge was obedience. Not blind obedience, but disciplined coordination. A Spartan warrior had to move with others, fight with others, and trust that the shield beside him would hold when blades clashed. They learned to see themselves as extensions of a single force. Alone, they were vulnerable. Together, they were unstoppable. Picture a row of boys standing shoulder to shoulder, each gripping a wooden shield. Their instructor walks behind them, testing their resolve with sudden strikes, sharp, unexpected, jarring. The shields shake in their hands, their forearms burn, but none of them break formation. None of them step forward or backward. They breathe slowly, focusing not on the pain in their arms, but on the presence of the shield touching theirs on each side. This simple drill planted the seed of the phalanx, Sparta's most important weapon. The agoge also taught self-control. Spartans were taught not to speak too much, not to boast, not to show fear or frustration. They were taught that anger wasted energy and panic broke structure. A Spartan stood still when others shook, thought clearly when others blurred, and acted with precision when others hesitated. By the time a young man left the agoge at age 20, he had been shaped by years of physical hardship, emotional discipline, and mental conditioning. He had learned to run without tiring, think without wavering, endure without complaint, and fight without fear. He had learned that honor was not found in victory alone, but in the discipline required to earn it. This system created men who were not only strong, but consistent, predictable in the best way. When battle came, commanders knew exactly how a Spartan line would behave. It would not crumble, it would not scatter, it would not turn and run. The men who walked out of the agoge carried the same mindset, the same discipline, the same fierce control. And those who succeeded in the agoge became the backbone of a society built on unity, clarity, and unwavering purpose. The world would come to fear them not because they were the strongest, but because they could not be broken. By the time a Spartan reached adulthood, the agoge had carved something deeper than muscle or endurance into him. It had shaped a mindset, a way of seeing the world that separated Sparta from every other Greek city-state. To understand the Spartans is to understand these values, because they guided every action, every law, and every sacrifice. At the core of Spartan life was simplicity, not as a limitation, but as a belief. Spartans valued what was essential and stripped away what was not. Their homes were plain, their meals were simple, their clothing was functional. Luxury was not just discouraged, it was seen as a threat to discipline. They believed that the fewer distractions a person had, the clearer his purpose became. Imagine living in a world where nothing around you is unnecessary. No clutter, no ornaments, no noise. Just clean stone walls, the weight of your cloak, the warmth of a morning fire, and the rhythm of training that carries through the city. In that silence, the mind sharpens. Focus becomes natural. Life feels direct, unclouded. This clarity extended into their values. Courage was expected, but it wasn't the loud, aggressive courage that poets loved to describe. Spartan courage was calm, disciplined, and controlled. It meant standing still in a line when fear clawed at your chest. It meant trusting the shield beside you more than the strength within your own arm. It meant doing what needed to be done without seeking praise. Honor to a Spartan wasn't about glory. It was about responsibility. A warrior who abandoned his shield in battle disgraced himself, not because he retreated, but because the shield protected the man next to him. A Spartan fought for the formation, not for the individual. Their identity was collective. Their strength came from unity. Another defining value was silence. Spartans were famous for speaking little, and when they did, their words were sharp, clever, and deliberate. They believed that unnecessary talk weakened discipline. A short answer carried more weight than a long explanation. This habit shaped how they thought, simply, directly, without drifting. Physical fitness wasn't merely encouraged, it was required. Spartan men and women trained their bodies daily, not for vanity, but because strength was a duty. A strong body protected the city. A healthy body produced healthy children. A disciplined body reflected a disciplined mind. In Sparta, physical excellence was a form of patriotism. Unlike many city-states that celebrated individual achievement, Sparta valued collective excellence. A single brilliant warrior meant nothing if the line behind him broke. Even their kings lived simply, trained alongside their soldiers, and were expected to die with them if necessary. Leadership meant example, not privilege. This mindset often made Spartans seem harsh or strange to other Greeks. Athenians, who loved debate and philosophy, found Spartan quietness unsettling. Other cities admired Sparta's military power, but questioned their strict customs. Yet even those who disliked them respected them, because the Spartan way produced something rare: consistency. Spartans behaved the same in private as they did in public, the same on peaceful days as they did in battle. Their discipline was not a performance, it was a way of life. Picture a Spartan warrior standing at the edge of a field at sunset, spear planted in the earth beside him. The sky glows orange and red. The air is still. He isn't thinking about wealth, status, or comfort. His thoughts are simple: protect the city, honor the ancestors, uphold the discipline he was raised in. The world around him might change, but his purpose does not. These values, simplicity, unity, discipline, courage, silence, built a society unlike any other in the ancient world. A society where every person, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, understood their place and their duty. A society that prepared, without knowing it, for a moment in history when a small group of its warriors would stand against an empire. To understand why the 300 mattered, you have to understand the world they stepped into, a world where Greece was anything but united. Each city-state believed it held the correct vision of what a community should be, and the differences between them ran deep. These differences shaped friendships, fueled rivalries, and created a landscape where cooperation was rare and mistrust was normal. Athens valued philosophy, democracy, and artistic achievement. Its streets were filled with debates, theatres, and merchants from across the sea. Athenians believed that intelligence and expression defined a powerful city. Sparta looked at this lifestyle and saw softness, too much talk, too much luxury, too much focus on self rather than discipline. Corinth thrived through trade. Ships came and went daily, carrying goods, travelers, and ideas. Wealth flowed through its markets. Sparta viewed this wealth with caution. They believed money corrupted morals, and Corinth's prosperity seemed unstable, built on temptations rather than strength. Thebes and the cities of Boeotia fought for influence through their armies and alliances. They admired strength, but their political strategies shifted often, making them unpredictable. Sparta distrusted unpredictability more than anything. Even smaller cities guarded their independence fiercely. Argos, Megara, Elis, each believed it held a unique identity worth protecting. Geography separated them, but pride kept them further apart. Now imagine yourself standing in a Greek marketplace somewhere outside of Sparta. The air is filled with the sound of merchants calling out prices, the scent of olives and fish drifting through the crowd. Travelers wear colorful robes, carrying goods from islands and distant ports. In the middle of this noise, a small group of Spartans passes through, cloaks plain, expressions calm, movements purposeful. They stand out immediately, not just because of their clothing, but because of their silence. People stare. Some admire them. Others whisper. For many Greeks, Spartans seemed foreign, even intimidating. Their minimalism felt extreme. Their discipline felt unnatural. Their refusal to embrace wealth or ornament made them appear almost rigid compared to the vibrant cities around them. And yet, beneath the differences, there was a strange kind of respect. Everyone knew that the Spartan way produced warriors who did not break, soldiers who would hold a line when others ran, a people who valued courage, honor, and unity more than comfort or fame. They might not have been loved by their neighbors, but they were undeniably respected. But this respect didn't erase the divisions. The Greeks fought each other almost as often as they fought outsiders. Athens and Sparta clashed for influence. Corinth and Megara competed for trade routes. Thebes sought power in the center of the mainland. Alliances shifted, grievances grew, and old wounds rarely healed. Even when a threat appeared from across the sea, Persia, vast and growing stronger with each conquered land, the Greeks struggled to agree on how to respond. Some cities feared Persia. Others were willing to cooperate with it. A few believed resistance was pointless. Unity in Greece never came easily. It was forged only when the danger became impossible to ignore. This fractured landscape makes the Spartan decision to face Persia even more extraordinary. They knew that not every Greek city would stand with them. They knew rivalries would linger even as the enemy approached. And yet, they prepared anyway, because their values did not depend on the approval of other cities. They moved with purpose, not popularity. Picture a Spartan envoy entering an Athenian council hall. Marble columns rise above him. Citizens debate loudly, arguing about politics, strategy, philosophy. The voices echo through the chamber. The Spartan listens quietly, arms crossed, saying nothing until a decision must be made. His silence carries as much weight as the longest Athenian speech. This contrast defined Greece. Brilliance divided by pride, courage shaped by different philosophies, strength scattered across cities that rarely trusted one another. Into this divided world, the Spartans would eventually march, not as conquerors, but as defenders, not for glory, but because someone had to stand when unity failed. And long before they reached Thermopylae, long before the clash with Persia's greatest warriors, the stage for their sacrifice had already been set by centuries of rivalry, difference, and division. Long before the world knew the story of the 300, Sparta had already carved its name into Greek history through conflict. Warfare was not something Spartans prepared for occasionally. It was woven into the structure of their society. The discipline, the training, the simplicity of their lives all served one purpose: to create warriors capable of defending their land and asserting Spartan strength across the Peloponnese. One of Sparta's earliest defining struggles was the Messenian Wars. These were brutal, long conflicts against the people who lived west of Sparta. The Messenians were strong and determined, and they resisted fiercely. The war lasted years, leaving deep scars on both sides. But through endurance and relentless discipline, the Spartans prevailed. They took Messenia and its fertile lands, gaining the resources they needed to grow into the force they would later become. These wars shaped their mindset permanently. They learned that victory required unity, patience, and the willingness to suffer without breaking. The Spartan phalanx, a formation that would one day become legendary, began to evolve here, born from necessity on the uneven hills and narrow passes of their homeland. Imagine a line of Spartan warriors standing at dawn, their shields pressed edge to edge. The air is cold, and the ground beneath their feet is damp with morning dew. Their cloaks brush lightly against their backs, and a slow breath escapes from each chest in unison. You can feel the tension in the air as the enemy approaches through the mist. But the Spartans do not shift. They wait. Their discipline feels heavier than their armor. As Sparta grew stronger, it attracted both fear and hostility. The city of Argos, one of Sparta's greatest rivals, clashed with them several times. At the Battle of Hysiae, Sparta suffered a rare defeat, one that forced them to rethink their tactics and recommit to discipline. They learned that arrogance had no place on the battlefield. Loss in Sparta was not shameful if it forged improvement. Later, when they faced Argos again, the Spartans fought with a sharpened resolve. The battles were harsh, direct, and unforgiving. And each victory added another layer to their reputation, one built not on flamboyant heroics, but on steady, disciplined efficiency. While other Greek cities celebrated individual champions, Sparta celebrated formation. While others built high walls, Sparta believed its warriors were walls enough. Other cities, armed with iron and bronze. Spartan warriors carried something different: confidence that the man beside them would hold the line no matter what came. Picture the clash of shields and spears as the phalanxes meet. Dust rises around the soldiers as they push forward, feet digging into the soil. The impact is heavy and rhythmic, like a heartbeat echoing across the battlefield. You feel the weight of your shield pulling against your arm, hear the sharp rasp of your breath inside your helmet. In that moment, nothing exists except the shield beside you and the rhythm of the line. As Sparta continued to fight across the Peloponnese, their reputation spread. Stories traveled from village to village, city to city. Stories of warriors who did not retreat, who held formation even when surrounded, who accepted hardship not as punishment, but as training. Even outside of warfare, their discipline was admired. Olympic competitions showcased Spartan athletes who ran with incredible stamina, wrestled with unmatched technique, and moved with fluid precision. Their success in sports reinforced what people already believed: Sparta produced humans crafted through discipline. By the time Persia began to expand westward, the world already knew that Spartan warriors were something different. Not invincible, not supernatural, but controlled, unified, and purposeful. Their rise didn't come from luck or chance. It came from centuries of conflict, adaptation, and a commitment to a way of life that demanded everything. The early battles carved the foundation for the legend that would one day be tested at Thermopylae. The world had seen Spartan strength in smaller conflicts. Soon it would see that strength pressed against an empire. If there was one creation that defined Spartan warfare, it was the phalanx. Other Greek cities used it too, but Sparta elevated it into something almost mechanical. An unbreakable wall of shields, spears, and discipline. It wasn't built on strength alone. It was built on unity, precision, and the belief that a warrior was nothing without the man beside him. The phalanx was simple in shape, but complex in execution. Warriors stood shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping, spears angled outward. Every movement had to be mirrored by the entire line. If one man stepped too far forward, he exposed his neighbor. If one shield dropped, the formation thinned. A single mistake could ripple through the ranks. That's why Spartan training drilled coordination into the body until it became instinct. Imagine standing in that formation. Your shield presses firmly against your arm, the bronze surface warm from the sun. You feel the weight of it pulling slightly at your shoulder, but you hold it steady. On your left, another shield overlaps yours, forming a seamless wall. On your right, your shield covers the warrior beside you. You are part of something larger than yourself, a living barrier that moves as one. Inside the phalanx, there was no room for fear or hesitation. A warrior couldn't think only about his own survival. He had to think about the line. The shield protected not just your own body, but half of your neighbor's. The spear you held was not for reckless thrusting, but controlled strikes in perfect rhythm with those around you. Months of training, years of drills, and a lifetime of discipline made this possible. The Spartans perfected this system because their society demanded unity in every aspect of life. From childhood, they learned to eat together, to train together, to sleep in barracks, to compete with their peers, and to rely on the group more than themselves. The phalanx was simply the battlefield expression of their daily reality. When a Spartan line advanced, it moved slowly and deliberately. Shields overlapped like scales on a creature's back. Spears extended outward in a forest of sharp bronze tips. The ground shook beneath their synchronized steps. Their helmets hid their faces, giving them the appearance of a single body rather than hundreds of individuals. In battle, the first moments of contact were not heroic swings or dramatic charges. They were pressure. Two walls slamming against each other, shields grinding, spears clashing, feet digging into the earth. The sound was heavy, rhythmic, the same kind of sound a heartbeat makes when adrenaline rises in your chest. You can imagine that moment, the world narrowing into the weight of your shield, the vibration running up your arm as an enemy spear strikes it, the muffled sounds inside your helmet, and the steady breathing of the warrior beside you. You push forward together, not as individuals, but as a single, unbroken force. This is why Spartans rarely broke formation. They weren't taught to fight alone. They weren't trained to stand out. They were trained to hold, to endure, to remain unshaken even when the enemy roared in their faces. Their strength was collective, not personal. Even enemies respected this. Cities like Athens and Corinth admired Spartan discipline even when they disliked their culture. Foreign observers wrote about the sight of a Spartan. The real secret of the phalanx wasn't the shield or the spear or the armor, it was trust. Trust that the man beside you would not run. Trust that the formation would hold. Trust that centuries of training, tradition, and sacrifice had created something greater than fear. This unity is what allowed the Spartans to stand against enemies larger in number. This unity is what held their lines firm in countless battles. And it was this very unity that would one day carry them to a narrow pass called Thermopylae, where the phalanx would face its greatest test. While Sparta was shaping its warriors through discipline and hardship, another power was rising far beyond the Aegean Sea. The Persian Empire, vast and wealthy, stretched across deserts, mountains, and ancient river valleys. It connected cities, kingdoms, and cultures under one ruler known as the Great King. To the Greeks, Persia felt almost limitless, an empire so large that its armies seemed to come from every corner of the world. Under kings like Cyrus, Darius, and later Xerxes, Persia expanded with steady force. Lands that resisted were conquered. Lands that submitted became part of a growing network of tribute and influence. The empire brought order, trade, and wealth to many places, but it also demanded obedience. And when a region refused, Persia responded decisively. For the Greeks, watching this expansion was unsettling. Their world was built on independence. Each city-state valued its own laws, its own customs, its own way of life. Being told to submit to a distant king was unthinkable. But not every Greek state felt the same fear. Some considered Persia too far away to worry about. Others believed diplomacy could prevent conflict. A few even accepted Persian influence willingly. But not every Greek state felt the same fear. Some considered Persia too far away to worry about. Others believed diplomacy could prevent conflict. A few even accepted Persian influence willingly. But two cities refused completely: Athens and Sparta. Imagine standing on a coastline in the eastern Aegean as news arrives from across the sea. A merchant ship docks at the shore, its crew speaking in hushed tones about Persian armies moving west, armies so large that villages empty before they even arrive. You watch the water shimmer under the sunlight and feel a quiet tension settle in your chest. The horizon no longer feels distant. It feels like a warning. As Persia moved closer to Greek lands, the city-states reacted differently. Some called for unity. Others argued among themselves. Old rivalries resurfaced. Trust was scarce. Even as the threat grew, the Greeks could not easily agree on a single strategy. Politics, pride, and distance made cooperation difficult. But Sparta did not hesitate. Its kings and council understood something that many others refused to accept. Persia would not stop expanding. Sooner or later, Greece would stand in its path. And when that moment came, strength alone would matter. Numbers, formation, discipline, and the willingness to endure. Sparta did not rely on walls, fleets, or negotiations. Their defense was the warriors they trained from childhood, the phalanx that never broke, and the values that shaped their every decision. While the rest of Greece debated, Sparta prepared. They strengthened their training, sharpened their strategies, and studied the terrain along potential invasion routes. They observed how Persia fought, its cavalry, its archers, its infantry drawn from different nations. They noted the vast size of Persian armies, but size did not intimidate them. Spartans cared less about how many enemies they faced, and more about how their own line would hold. And though the immortals, the elite Persian infantry, were admired across the empire for their discipline and skill, Sparta believed no force was unstoppable. Not if the terrain favored them, not if the line held, not if the shield wall stayed unbroken. Picture yourself walking through Sparta as talk of Persia spreads. The air feels heavier. People move with a certain alertness, preparing quietly. No shouts, no panic, no frantic energy, just calm determination. Men train with sharper focus. Women encourage discipline at home. Elders offer counsel. The city feels like a storm gathering strength, silent but powerful. The Spartans did not know when Persia would arrive or how large the invasion would be. But they understood what it meant for Greece. If the Greeks could not unite, the empire would swallow them piece by piece. Sparta would not allow that, not because they sought glory, but because their values demanded resistance. This rising tension, this looming shadow from the east, set the stage for what would become one of the most iconic stands in ancient history. But before the world saw 300 Spartans holding a narrow pass, the warning signs were already clear. Persia was coming. The question was whether Greece would stand together or fall apart. As the shadow of Persia stretched closer to Greece, the city-states were forced to confront a truth many had avoided. The empire was no longer a distant storm. It was approaching their shores, moving with purpose. Greek envoys met, argued, and debated for days at a time, each city speaking from its own fears and priorities. Athens worried for its navy and its young democracy. Corinth feared losing trade routes that fed its wealth. Smaller cities worried about survival more than honor. Some even considered negotiation, hoping Persia might spare them in exchange for loyalty. But Sparta listened to all of this with calm silence. Spartans didn't debate threats. They prepared for them. Their kings understood that unity would be difficult, but resistance was necessary. And among these kings was Leonidas, a man not remembered for his bloodline or luxury, but for his clarity. He was a Spartan king in the truest sense, calm, disciplined, and shaped by the same training as every warrior he commanded. He did not rule from above. He stood among his people. Leonidas knew Greece needed time to organize, time to gather forces, time to convince reluctant cities that Persia would not spare anyone who bowed too easily. The best way to buy time was to hold the narrow pass of Thermopylae, the hot gates, a place where numbers mattered far less than discipline and terrain. Imagine the moment envoys from other cities arrived in Sparta, carrying scrolls with reports of Persian movements. They stand inside a simple hall, not a marble palace. The walls are bare, the air quiet. Spartan elders listen without reaction, their eyes steady. No panic, no rushing, only focus. Outside, the sound of training never stops, even during discussion of an invasion. Greece needed a small, fast force to delay Persia, a force that would not break, even when outnumbered. Sparta could provide such warriors. But religious festivals and traditions limited how many soldiers they could legally send at that moment. Leonidas understood this, and instead of calling for thousands, he chose a smaller number, men who already had heirs, so that no family line would disappear if they fell. 300. This choice was not symbolic. It was practical. It was Spartan. The city could not yet commit its full army, but it could send its most disciplined men to fulfill a purpose, hold the pass long enough for Greece to gather strength. Other Greek states agreed to join them, though with hesitation. Some feared the battle would be hopeless. Others admired Sparta's willingness to stand at the front. Small cities sent what warriors they could. The Thespians and Thebans sent fighters as well, knowing the risks. The numbers were still small, but a force was forming, not out of unity, but out of necessity. Before departing, Leonidas addressed the Spartans who would travel with him. There were no dramatic speeches, no grand declarations. Spartans did not need them. Their understanding came from years of training, from a shared code that required no embellishment. They knew the march ahead might be their last. They accepted it with steady breaths and calm minds. Picture the early morning when the chosen warriors gathered in the city. Their cloaks moved in the light breeze. Spears rested diagonally across their shoulders. The rising sun cast long shadows across the ground. Families said quiet farewells. Some held hands. Others embraced. A few simply nodded to one another, knowing words were unnecessary. A Spartan's final moment at home was often the simplest one. Leonidas did not walk at the front as a distant king, but among them, his steps in sync with the line. Their armor was the same. Their shields carried the same weight. Their purpose was shared. They marched because their homeland demanded it, because their values required it, and because someone had to step forward while the rest of Greece searched. Every step carried them closer to a moment that would define not only their city, but the memory of Greece itself. They marched not to win a war, but to begin one. They marched to show Persia that Greece would not kneel. They marched to the hot gates, where the narrow pass waited, and where fate would test the strength of everything Sparta had built. Thermopylae, the hot gates, a place where the mountains press sharply toward the sea, leaving only a thin path between rock and water. To most travelers, it was just another route along the coast, but to a strategist, it was a natural fortress, a corridor so narrow that massive armies could not spread out or surround their enemy, a place where discipline mattered more than numbers, a place perfectly suited for Sparta. As Leonidas and the Greek forces approached, the landscape revealed itself with dramatic contrast. Jagged cliffs rose steeply on one side, rough and imposing, their shadows stretching over the pass. On the other side lay a long stretch of coastline, waves rolling in with a slow, steady rhythm. The air smelled of salt, warm earth, and the faint sulphur of the natural hot springs that gave the region its name. Imagine standing there with the Spartans for the first time. The wind brushes across your cloak. The sun gleams off bronze helmets in a soft golden haze. You hear the distant crash of waves mingling with the low murmur of soldiers preparing their gear. The narrowness of the pass becomes clear. You stretch out your arms, and it feels as though you could almost touch both sides of the battlefield. The Spartans immediately understood the advantage. Here, in this tight space, the Persian numbers meant nothing. Their cavalry would be useless, their archers limited, their formations restricted. Thermopylae turned the massive imperial army into a narrow stream, and Leonidas intended to block it with a stone wall of shields. Before the Persians arrived, the Greeks strengthened an old Phocian wall that had once stood across the pass. They repaired it with stones and timber, creating a barrier that forced the enemy to squeeze even tighter into the narrowest section. Behind this wall, the Spartans positioned themselves in formation, spears angled forward, shields overlapping. Every warrior understood his place. As they prepared, scouts brought word of the Persian army advancing. Dust clouds rose on the horizon like distant storms. The ground trembled under the steps of thousands, tens of thousands, soldiers marching as one. It was said that the Persian host was so large it drank rivers dry as it passed. And at its center marched the elite immortals, the king's personal guard, feared across the empire for their discipline and skill. But to Leonidas and his men, these stories were not causes for fear. They were information, nothing more. Picture the Spartan line as they waited, shields braced, spears leveled. Their breathing steady, their expressions hidden by bronze helmets. They were not shaken by the size of the enemy. They had trained their entire lives for a moment like this. The Persians expected the Greeks to scatter at the sight of their army. Instead, they saw warriors standing in complete silence. When the Persian messengers rode forward, demanding surrender and obedience to the great king, Leonidas and his warriors did not waver. No one lowered their eyes, no one shifted their stance. The message was simple. The Greeks would not move. Xerxes, hearing of this defiance, sent another demand: "Lay down your weapons." The Spartan answer came back sharp and legendary: "Come and take them." Not shouted, not embellished, just a calm invitation spoken with absolute conviction. The Persians were stunned. They had never seen resistance like this. Armies of countless nations had submitted before them. Cities opened their gates without a fight. But these few Greeks, these Spartans, stood unmoved. The first wave of the Persian attack came with fierce confidence. Thousands of infantry rushed into the pass, expecting the Greeks to break at the first push. But the narrow terrain betrayed them. Their numbers compressed, their formations tangled, and the phalanx held firm. Imagine the moment of impact. The Persian front line slams into the Spartan shields. A deep thud echoes through the pass. Spears thrust forward in perfect rhythm, striking with the precision of a machine. The Persians push, but they cannot break through. Their weapons glance off bronze. Their ranks stumble over each other in the cramped space. The Spartans, meanwhile, move with effortless control. They rotate positions when tired. They advance, retreat, and strike as a single body. Each motion is practiced, deliberate, and unbroken. Every step feels like a part of a larger pattern. Wave after wave crashes against them, and wave after wave fails. The ground grew slick with dust and sweat. The air filled with the metallic scent of bronze and the sharp cries of battle. Yet through it all, the Spartan line remained steady. Their shields rose and fell in unison. Their spears darted forward with cold precision. They did not shout. They did not boast. They simply worked, calm, controlled, relentless. As the hours passed, Persian commanders grew frustrated. How could so few men hold back so many? They sent stronger units, more experienced fighters, soldiers from different corners of the empire. But the result was always the same. The narrow pass turned their vast army into scattered groups, each crushed against the phalanx like waves against rock. When exhaustion threatened the Spartans, they rotated ranks smoothly. Fresh warriors stepped forward while others stepped back, catching their breath behind the wall of shields. The Persians had no such system. Their front ranks were trampled by those behind them, unable to retreat or regroup in the tight space. By afternoon, the battlefield echoed with the cries of the wounded and the roar of clashing bronze. Yet the Spartans remained composed. The line never broke. The wall of shields never faltered. The Persians, for the first time in their campaign, began to understand that this battle would not be won through simple force. And then came the immortals. The elite guard advanced with confidence, their ranks perfectly ordered, armor gleaming beneath the sun. They were the pride of Persia, feared across continents. But the Spartans faced them without hesitation. To them, no enemy was unbeatable. Only the phalanx mattered. When the immortals entered the pass, the atmosphere shifted. Their approach was silent, disciplined, almost ritualistic. They believed, just as the world believed, that they could break any line, overwhelm any force, crush any resistance through sheer excellence. But Thermopylae was unlike any battlefield they had seen. The cliffs pressed against them. The sea trapped them. Their numbers, usually an advantage, became a burden. The first clash rang through the pass like a thunderstrike. Bronze smashed against wicker shields, spears splintered, armor cracked. The Spartans absorbed the impact with perfect formation, their shields locked edge to edge. Their spears lashed out with deadly rhythm, striking gaps in armor, driving back the elite soldiers inch by inch. The immortals fought fiercely, but they were forced into a narrow corridor where their formations couldn't expand, their flanking maneuvers couldn't unfold, and their superior numbers meant nothing. Their shorter spears put them at a disadvantage. Their attempts to rotate fresh soldiers were clumsy and slow in the crushed space. The Spartans, sensing every weakness, pressed forward with mechanical precision. When their spears broke, they drew Xiphos blades. When the immortals surged, they stepped back in perfect unison, then snapped forward with a coordinated strike that sent ripples of chaos through the Persian ranks. Dust rose in thick clouds. The air grew hot with struggling bodies. Cries echoed off the stone walls. Yet the Spartan line held strong, unbroken, unmoved. For every immortal that stepped forward, another fell. By the time the sun dipped low, something unthinkable had happened. The immortals were forced to retreat. Xerxes, watching from a distance, was said to have risen from his throne in disbelief. His greatest warriors had been stopped. His pride had been wounded, and the pass remained firmly in Greek hands. As the immortals withdrew, the cliffs of Thermopylae fell strangely quiet. The Persians pulled back to regroup, their confidence shaken for the first time in the campaign. The Greeks used the moment to steady their formation, retrieve fallen spears, and rotate fresh men to the front. Dust settled slowly over the narrow pass, drifting like smoke from an unseen fire. For the Spartans, this pause was nothing unusual. They wiped sweat from their brows, adjusted the straps of their armor, and prepared for the next assault with the same calm they had shown since the first day. Their muscles ached, their shields were dented, and their spears worn from repeated clashes, but their discipline remained sharp. Every man understood the rhythm of the battlefield: pressure, resistance, breath, reset. Across the field, Persian officers barked orders as they tried to reorganize troops into coherent units. Many soldiers were exhausted, confused, or shaken by the unexpected resistance. Some had never fought in such tight quarters. Others had never seen their elite force repelled. The air buzzed with frustration. Imagine standing in the Spartan line during this lull. Your shield is warm against your arm. Your lungs fill with dust and salt from the nearby sea, and the ground beneath your feet vibrates with distant marching. You know the Persians are gathering for another push. You can feel it in the air, the tension, the rising pulse of an empire refusing to concede. And yet there is no fear among the Greeks. Their confidence is not arrogance, it is earned. They have watched wave after wave break against their shield wall, like the sea crashing endlessly against stone. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the cliffs, Persian drums thundered in the distance. Warriors reformed, archers knocked arrows, and fresh units moved into position. Another assault was coming, and the Spartans tightened their grips, lowered their stances, and prepared once more to hold the line. When the Persians surged forward again, They came with renewed determination, fresh infantry, reorganized units, and commanders shouting over the roar of thousands. But the narrow pass betrayed them once more. The cliffs funneled the massive force into a tight column, forcing the front ranks to absorb the full weight of the battle, while those behind them pushed blindly forward. The Spartans braced themselves, shields locked, spears angled, feet planted in the dusty earth. The moment the Persian line collided with theirs, the entire pass erupted into violent motion. The sound was deafening, metal on metal, shields grinding, men shouting, the rhythmic thud of bodies colliding. Yet the Greeks moved with practiced precision. The phalanx expanded and contracted like a single living creature. When pressure increased, the front ranks anchored their heels and pushed back with their shields. When an enemy fell, a Spartan spear darted forward to exploit the opening. When a man tired, the warrior behind him smoothly stepped in to his place. The Persians, despite their bravery, struggled to match this discipline. Their attacks were energetic but inconsistent. Their formations broke easily under pressure. And each time they attempted to press deeper into the pass, they found themselves trapped behind their own men, unable to maneuver, unable to retreat, unable to breathe. Imagine being in the center of that chaos. Dust fills the air until the world looks hazy and golden. You feel the heat radiating from the bodies around you. Your shield vibrates with every strike. Sweat stings your eyes. Yet the line holds, inch by inch, breath by breath. Despite hours of relentless assault, the Spartans did not falter. Their calm defied the chaos around them. Their movements were efficient, controlled, almost cold. Every decision was shaped by decades of training. By nightfall, the Persians had gained nothing. The Greeks still held the hot gates, and Xerxes, watching from afar, felt the first true flicker of doubt. Night settled over Thermopylae, but the tension did not fade. Small fires burned across the Greek camp, their orange glow reflecting off dented shields and dusty helmets. Spartans and their allies moved with quiet purpose, tending wounds, repairing broken spear shafts, tightening armor straps. The air smelled of smoke, salt, and exhaustion, but also of unshaken resolve. For the Spartans, night was not a time for fear. It was preparation. They sat calmly, sharpening their weapons with slow, deliberate movements. Some leaned against the rocky walls, eyes half closed, letting their muscles rest. Others whispered brief, practical exchanges about the fighting to come. Even after days of battle, they carried themselves with a steady, almost serene focus. Across the coastline, the Persian camp glowed like a vast constellation. Thousands of fires flickered in the dark, spreading across the beach and hills. The empire never slept. Officers barked orders, horses stamped nervously. Soldiers murmured about the day's failures, the impenetrable Greek line, and the king's growing frustration. Even victory felt uncertain now. Imagine walking through the Greek camp at this moment. The Thespians tend to scraped arms and bruised ribs. Corinthian hoplites speak softly about the next day's formations. A Spartan polishes his helmet with slow precision, as if he were preparing for ceremony rather than war. Despite the strain, an unusual calm hangs in the air, the calm of men who know exactly who they are and why they stand. The Persians, meanwhile, wrestle with doubt. Their numbers had meant nothing inside the narrow pass. Their elite had been pushed back. Their king had watched defeat unfold before his eyes. No one knew how many more assaults it would take to break the Greek defense. Only that Xerxes would not stop until the hot gates were his. Under the moonlight, reflecting faintly off bronze shields and distant waves, both armies prepared in their own way. The Greeks found strength in silence. The Persians found strength in numbers. The next attack was already gathering on the horizon. At dawn, the Persians returned with renewed fury. Fresh units marched forward in tight waves, shouting battle cries that echoed sharply off the stone cliffs. Their confidence had been shaken, but not broken. Xerxes demanded progress, and thousands of soldiers obeyed. The Greeks braced themselves. Shields lifted, spears angled, feet dug into the dusty ground. When the Persian front slammed into the phalanx, the entire pass exploded into violent motion. The Spartan-led line absorbed the impact with practiced stability, the formation tightening instinctively under pressure. Spears thrust forward in controlled bursts, shields locked in seamless rhythm. Every movement was measured, no wasted energy, no panic, no hesitation. Even the men rotating through the front line did so with silent efficiency, stepping in and out with the precision of a well-rehearsed dance. Persian archers unleashed volleys overhead, but the narrow space limited their angle. Greek shields rose like a bronze canopy, and most arrows clattered uselessly against them. The thunder of the battlefield swallowed the sound of falling shafts. To the Persians, the pass felt like a trap. Soldiers pushed from behind, forcing the front ranks against the Greek wall. Corpses piled where they fell, turning the ground uneven and treacherous. Every step forward felt like sinking into chaos. Every failed assault eroded morale. Imagine standing inside the phalanx during this clash. Your shield vibrates with each impact. Your arms burn with effort. Dust stings your eyes. Yet your breathing remains steady. You hear the controlled rhythm of the warriors beside you. Feel the push of the formation behind you. Sense the unity holding everything together. The pressure is immense, but so is your training. Hours passed. The Persians attacked again and again, but the line never broke. Their determination could not overcome Greek discipline. Their numbers could not overcome the terrain. Their fury could not overcome the calm precision of the phalanx. By midday, the Persians withdrew once more. The Greeks still held the hot gates, but unseen in the mountains above, a far more dangerous threat had begun to move. The first steps of betrayal. While the Persians struggled at the front of the pass, something far more dangerous began to unfold high in the mountains above Thermopylae. Away from the noise of battle, where the cliffs grew jagged and the goat paths twisted like thin ribbons of stone, a man approached the Persian camp with information that would change everything. His name was Ephialtes. He was a local from the region, familiar with every hidden trail that ran across the slopes. And among those trails was a narrow path, steep, rocky, and easily overlooked, that wound behind the Greek position and descended toward the rear of the hot gates. Few knew it existed. Even fewer could navigate it safely. But Ephialtes knew it well. Whether driven by fear, greed, resentment, or desire for reward, he revealed the existence of this path to Xerxes. For days the great king had watched the Greek line repel his forces. Now he finally saw a way around it. He summoned elite troops, units capable of silent movement and precise coordination, and ordered them to follow Ephialtes up the mountain under the cover of night. Imagine that ascent. Darkness wrapped around the cliffs like a heavy cloak. Torches were shielded to hide the flames. Warriors moved in near silence, stepping carefully across loose stones that shifted under their weight. Below them, the distant glow of Greek campfires flickered softly. As the sun rose on the final day, the remaining Greeks, Spartans, Thespians, and Thebans, formed their last line inside the narrow pass. They now faced Persians on both sides, the main army at the front, and the units that had climbed down the mountain path behind them. Every man understood the truth. None would leave Thermopylae alive. Still, they lifted their shields, planted their feet, and prepared to meet the assault head-on. The Persian attack hit with crushing force. The pass shook with the weight of thousands pushing forward. Dust burst into the air, and the sound of metal slamming against metal filled the corridor. But the Greek line held. They pushed back with practiced precision, forcing the Persians into the tightest space, where sheer numbers meant nothing. Imagine standing in that line. The air is hot with the breath of packed bodies. Your shield rattles with every strike. You glimpse flashes of bronze through swirling dust. Shouts and steel clash together in a chaotic roar. But your training keeps you steady. You focus on breathing, on balance, on matching the movements of the warrior beside you. When spears snapped, Spartans switched to swords. Thespians fought shoulder to shoulder with fierce resolve. The Thebans held the rear, trying to slow the troops descending from the mountains. But pressure increased from both directions. Arrows fell in heavy waves. The defenders were slowly squeezed toward the center. Then Leonidas fell. Ancient accounts differ on how, but all agree on what followed. The Spartans surged forward with ferocity. They fought to retrieve their king's body, forming a tight ring around him. Their determination only grew as the odds worsened. The battle became desperate. Men fought with broken blades, shattered spears, and stones torn from the ground. Shields cracked, armor bent. Dust mixed with blood on their skin. Step by step, they were pushed back, but not one fled. They fought until their weapons failed, and then with their hands. One by one, the final defenders fell. When the last man dropped, the pass finally opened. But the legacy of their stand had only begun. When the final defenders fell, The Persians claimed the hot gates, but victory did not feel triumphant. The battlefield grew still. Dust drifted over broken shields and shattered spears. The cliffs that had echoed with days of fighting now stood silent, as if absorbing the weight of what had happened. Persia had taken the pass, yet the cost had been far greater than expected. Their soldiers marched forward, but many whispered about the resistance they had witnessed. They had seen a small force stand against the largest army in the world and refuse to bend. Even officers, hardened by years of campaigning, admitted that the Greeks at Thermopylae had fought with a discipline unlike anything they had faced. Meanwhile, word of the stand spread quickly across Greece. Messengers arrived in distant cities, carrying the story of how the Spartans and Thespians held the pass for days, fought until surrounded, and died shields in hand. Crowds gathered in markets and temples to listen. People leaned in close as they heard how the defenders never broke formation, even when death was certain. Imagine standing in one of those city squares. A dusty messenger describes the shield wall, the narrow pass, the constant pressure of the Persian waves. You watch the faces around you change, shock, sorrow, then something deeper. Respect. The reaction across Greece was powerful. The sacrifice at Thermopylae made the Persian threat real. It forced every city to confront the fact that the empire was coming, and that hesitation would mean destruction. Allies who had argued or doubted now felt a new fire. Thermopylae didn't weaken Greece, it awakened it. Athens prepared its fleet. Sparta prepared its armies. Smaller cities gathered what forces they could. The united front Greece had been struggling to form began taking shape. The Persians moved south, but they no longer marched toward a divided land. They marched toward a Greece that had been changed by the hot gates forever. Thermopylae did not stop the Persian invasion, but it reshaped the course of the war. The courage of the Spartans, Thespians, and the few others who remained became a turning point, not because they defeated the empire, but because they changed how Greece responded to it. Their sacrifice bought time, inspired unity, and lit a fire across the land. After securing the pass, Xerxes' army continued moving south. Towns were burned, roads filled with soldiers. The empire advanced with the momentum of a rising tide. But what Persia encountered next was not the hesitant, divided Greece it had expected. It was a Greece awakened by the stand at the hot gates. While the fighting raged at Thermopylae, the Greek fleet had already been engaging the Persians at Artemisium. Those battles were fierce and costly, but the time gained at the pass allowed the navy to regroup for a greater confrontation, the battle that would shift the entire war. Salamis. Themistocles, the Athenian commander, drew the Persian navy into the narrow straits near Salamis, using terrain the same way the Spartans used the pass. In tight waters, Persian numbers became useless. Greek ships, smaller and more agile, struck with precision. By the end, the Persian fleet was broken, and hope surged across Greece. But the war still demanded one more stand on land. That moment came nearly a year later at Plataea, where a united Greek force, Spartans, Athenians, Corinthians, and many others, defeated the Persian army and ended the invasion. Imagine Greece after Plataea. Bells ringing in cities, families embracing returning warriors, leaders offering thanks to the gods. But beneath the celebration, one memory stood at the center of it all: the narrow pass where a few hundred men chose to buy their homeland the time it needed. Thermopylae did not mark the end of the war. It marked the beginning of Greek unity. And unity is what saved them. The war eventually turned in Greece's favor. But the story of Thermopylae grew even faster than the victories that followed. Across the Greek world, people repeated the tale of the small force that held the hot gates. Poets recited lines honoring the fallen. Sculptors carved scenes of the phalanx holding firm against an empire. Children grew up hearing the names of Leonidas and the 300 spoken with pride. Sparta, once seen by some as harsh or overly strict, became a symbol of something deeper. Their discipline, their clarity, and their willingness to sacrifice transformed how the rest of Greece viewed them. Even cities that had criticized Sparta's way of life now understood the strength behind it. Their values were not just traditions, they were tools that had shaped warriors capable of stopping an empire long enough for Greece to stand. Imagine traveling through Greece a generation later. In marketplaces, you hear merchants using the story to teach lessons about courage. In training fields, young athletes push harder, inspired by tales of the shield wall at Thermopylae. Even distant islands speak of the battle as if it happened near their own shores. The legend stretched far beyond Greece. Centuries later, Romans admired the Spartans for their discipline. Writers used their story to inspire soldiers. Leaders studied the battle not just as history, but as an example of how a small force could hold against overwhelming odds when united by purpose. Even when Sparta later declined in political power, the legacy of Thermopylae remained untouched. The cliffs, the narrow pass, and the memory of the men who stood there outlived every rise and fall of cities and kingdoms. Imagine a scholar centuries later reading about the battle by lamplight. The flame flickers against old parchment as he reads how warriors, vastly outnumbered, refused to yield. He pauses, feeling the weight of that decision across time. The lesson is clear. Courage is not in numbers, but in resolve. Thermopylae became more than a battle. It became a story the world would never forget. For all its heroism, Thermopylae was also a reminder of something deeper about the human spirit. Those warriors knew they were marching toward their final day, yet they went with steady minds. They understood that some moments in history require a stand, not for victory, not for glory, but for the future that comes after. Their sacrifice was not about defeating Persia. It was about giving Greece the chance to rise. Over time, the hot gates became a place of quiet pilgrimage. Travelers walked the narrow pass, imagining how the cliffs once echoed with the clash of shields and the roar of thousands. They touched the stones, knowing that beneath their feet lay the ground where warriors held firm against impossible odds. Even as the coastline shifted over centuries and the landscape changed, the spirit of the place remained. Imagine standing there yourself. You close your eyes and hear the distant crash of the sea. You can almost picture the red cloaks lined across the pass, the shimmer of bronze catching the morning sun, the muffled thud of spears striking shields. It feels as though time folds, bringing you face to face with the courage that once stood here. The story of the 300 and the allies who refused to leave became a lesson passed from generation to generation. It showed that strength is not always measured by surviving, but by choosing what is worth giving everything for. It showed that unity can be born from sacrifice. And it showed that even the mightiest empire can be slowed by men willing to stand in a narrow space and say, "No further." As people retold the story through the ages, it transformed from history into inspiration. It became a reminder that ordinary individuals can become legends simply by holding to their values when the world tries to break them. Thermopylae stands not only as a moment of war, but as a symbol of courage that refuses to fade. In the centuries that followed, Thermopylae became a model for how people understood bravery. Not the loud, boastful kind, but the quiet resolve that stands firm even when the outcome is certain. Warriors, philosophers, leaders, each found something different in the story. Some saw discipline, others saw loyalty. Many saw the power of a small group standing together when everything seems lost. The pass itself changed over time. Erosion softened the cliffs. The shoreline shifted, moving farther from where the ancient warriors once fought. Yet visitors still came. They traced the landscape, imagining how narrow the battlefield once was. They pictured the wall the Greeks rebuilt, the shield line, the dust rising in waves as Persia surged forward. Many who visited left with a deeper understanding. Thermopylae was a reminder that courage is a choice made long before the moment of danger arrives. It is built in training, in values, in the small decisions made every day. The Spartans didn't suddenly become brave when the battle began. They had been preparing for that moment their entire lives. Imagine a traveler standing where Leonidas once stood, looking out over the pass. The wind carries the faint scent of earth and sea. The world is quiet, almost peaceful. Yet beneath that calm lies the echo of all who fought and fell here. The traveler feels a weight in the air, not of sorrow, but of respect. The Spartans knew what stood to be lost. The Thespians chose to stay, even when offered escape. The Thebans, bound by uncertainty and obligation, still fought in the final moments. Together, they showed that bravery can come from different hearts, different cities, different reasons, but it can still form a single unbreakable line. Their stand became a message carried far beyond Greece. that a moment of courage can echo across time, shaping generations that were never there to witness it. The hot gates may no longer look like they once did, but the spirit of that narrow pass remains untouched. As time passed, the world changed, but the story of Thermopylae never faded. People kept returning to it because it carried something deeper than strategy or heroism. It showed how a small group, united by purpose, could stand against fear itself. It reminded generations that courage can rise in the most impossible moments. Writers retold the story again and again. Some focused on Leonidas, the king who chose duty over survival. Others highlighted the 300 and their unbreakable discipline. Many honored the Thespians, who stayed by choice and stood beside the Spartans until the end. Each telling added a new voice to the legend, but the heart of the story never changed. Imagine a student, centuries later, reading about the hot gates for the first time. The room is quiet. Light falls softly across the page. As they read about men who fought while surrounded on all sides, they feel the weight behind the words. These weren't flawless heroes, they were human. They felt fear and pain, but they stood anyway. That becomes the lesson. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to face it. Leaders in distant lands studied Thermopylae to understand how unity, discipline, and purpose could turn a small force into something far greater than numbers. Soldiers looked to it for motivation. Thinkers saw in it a message about resolve and sacrifice. Even today, the story remains alive. Movies, books, and conversations still return to that narrow pass where a few hundred men held firm against an empire. People connect with it because the message is universal. Every person faces moments when they must choose whether to stand firm or step aside. Thermopylae reminds us that some stands echo across time, not because they change the outcome of a single battle, but because they reveal the strength of the human spirit. As the story of Thermopylae continued through the centuries, people began to see it not just as a tale of war, but as a mirror that revealed something about themselves. Every generation found a different meaning in the narrow pass. Some saw sacrifice, others saw unity. Others saw the power of standing firm when everything seems impossible. The story adapted to each era, yet its core remained unchanged. Imagine someone hearing the story for the first time today, not in a classroom or a book, but late at night, searching for inspiration or clarity. They hear about a small force facing an overwhelming enemy, about men choosing duty over safety, about courage that outlived every one of them. Something about it resonates. It reminds them that their own challenges, no matter how heavy, can be faced step by step, breath by breath. That is the hidden strength of Thermopylae. It reaches beyond the battlefield. It shows that bravery often begins quietly, long before the moment of danger arrives. It begins in preparation, in discipline, in choosing your values and standing by them. When the day comes and fear rises, those choices become armor. Over time, memorials were built in the region. Stones carved with inscriptions honored the fallen. Visitors walked the ground where the phalanx once stood, feeling the weight of history beneath their feet. They touched the markers and read the ancient lines that praised the courage of those who died there. One famous inscription captured the spirit. "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." Simple words, yet powerful. An echo from men who understood their duty so clearly that they faced death without hesitation. The hot gates became more than a location. They became a reminder that courage is a choice made in silence, long before it is seen, and that even the narrowest ground can become a place where legends rise. As the story of Thermopylae spreads across time, it settles into a quiet truth. Not every stand is about winning. Some are about showing what a people believe in, what they refuse to surrender, and what future they hope to protect. The warriors at the hot gates understood that their final day was only the first chapter in something much larger. Imagine walking through modern Greece and hearing the wind move across the landscape. Somewhere in the distance, waves break against the shore. Mountains rise sharply in the background. And though the land has changed, there's a feeling that the past still lingers beneath the surface. You can sense the memory of the men who fought, the weight of their choice, the echo of their final stand. People still travel to the site, standing where the phalanx once formed. Some arrive quietly, reading the stone inscriptions in silence. Others bring children and tell them the story, hoping they'll carry its meaning forward. A few simply sit and look out at the hills, letting the peace of the place wash over them. Thermopylae teaches something simple but powerful. Courage can come from ordinary people when they decide that something matters more than fear. The Spartans and their allies were not seeking fame. They were not chasing glory. They were holding a line so that others behind them could live, plan, fight, and eventually triumph. And that might be why the story endures. It speaks to the part of us that wonders how we would act when everything is on the line. It reminds us that even a small stand can inspire countless others. The cliffs, the stones, the shifting coastline, they may change with time, but the memory of the hot gates remains solid, untouched. A reminder that bravery leaves an imprint deeper than any battlefield. As stories of the hot gates continued to travel across generations, they slowly became more than history. They became a way for people to understand themselves. In moments of doubt, leaders looked back to Thermopylae for clarity. In times of struggle, ordinary people found strength in the memory of the narrow pass and the men who refused to retreat. Imagine a quiet evening centuries later. A parent sits with their child, telling the story not as a tale of war, but as a lesson about standing firm when the world feels overwhelming. The child listens closely, eyes wide, imagining the shield wall, the mountains rising on both sides, the courage it took to hold the line. Those lessons would shape them, even if they never stepped onto a battlefield. Thermopylae also became a way for different cultures to reflect on sacrifice. The world might disagree on many things, but the idea of standing for something greater than yourself is universal. Poets in distant lands wrote verses about the battle. Scholars debated its strategies. Artists painted scenes of the final stand, trying to capture the intensity and resolve of the defenders. And as each generation added its voice, the story grew, not in size, but in meaning. Today, when someone hears the word Thermopylae, they don't think only of a place. They think of courage. They think of discipline. They think of people who faced the impossible and chose to stand anyway. The landscape may look different now, but the lesson remains untouched. The hot gates remind us that even when the world narrows and options fade, resolve can still shine. It shows that one moment of bravery can echo further than anyone could imagine. Thermopylae endures because courage endures. As the years turned into centuries, the world remembered Thermopylae not because of how many fell, but because of how they stood. The story stayed alive through quiet moments as much as grand retellings. A traveler reading by firelight, a soldier preparing for his first campaign, a philosopher reflecting on duty and honor. Each person found a different truth in the narrow pass. What makes the story powerful is not the scale of the battle, but the clarity of the choice. The defenders knew the odds. They understood what was coming. Yet they still lifted their shields and formed their line. Their courage wasn't loud. It was steady. It was the kind that settles deep in the soul and refuses to move. Imagine returning to the hot gates today, standing beneath the open sky. Cars pass in the distance, and the modern world hums quietly around you. Yet the ground carries a weight that time couldn't erase. You close your eyes and feel a faint echo, dust rising, shields locking, voices calling out one last command. For a moment, you understand why the story has lasted so long. Thermopylae represents a promise that even when everything narrows to a single path, a person can choose strength. A community can choose unity. A small force can choose to say, "This far, no further." That choice resonates beyond history books. It touches anyone who has ever faced a moment where fear felt overwhelming, where the world seemed to push in from all sides. The stand at the hot gates whispers that courage is possible even then. The men who fought there could not have known how far their story would travel. They simply did what they believed was right. And because of that, their echoes continue to move through time, reminding each generation of the power held in a single moment of resolve. As the story of Thermopylae continued through the ages, it slowly shifted from a tale of warriors to a reflection on what it means to live with purpose. People realized the battle wasn't only about shields and spears, it was about clarity. The defenders understood their duty so deeply that even the certainty of death could not move them away from it. Imagine a historian writing late at night, candlelight flickering across scrolls and notes. As they trace the events of the battle, they pause, not on the tactics, but on the moments between them. The quiet before the final charge, the shared nods between warriors, the understanding in their eyes. Those small human details reveal the true weight of the stand. Over time, Thermopylae became a reminder that greatness doesn't always come from victory. Sometimes it comes from choosing to stand for something, even when the world says you cannot win. It comes from unity, people locking metaphorical shields together, refusing to give in to fear or pressure. The legacy also taught that sacrifice can shape the future. Without the time the defenders bought, Greece may never have united, may never have pushed back the empire, may never have written the history that influenced the world for thousands of years. Their final stand created space for others to act, for others to rise. Picture someone today facing their own challenges. They may never hold a shield or march into battle, but the spirit of the 300 still speaks to them. It reminds them that progress often begins with a single decision to hold steady, to not retreat, to take one more step forward. That is why Thermopylae lives on, not as a relic of the past, but as guidance for the present. The hot gates may no longer resemble the battlefield they once were, but the meaning carved into that narrow ground remains as strong as ever. As centuries passed, the story of Thermopylae became more than a tale of battle. It became a symbol that people carried with them in moments of struggle. Warriors studied it to understand discipline. Leaders reflected on its lessons of duty. Ordinary people drew strength from the idea that even in the tightest corners of life, resolve can still shine. Imagine two friends walking at dusk. One feels overwhelmed by the weight of responsibilities. The other tells them about the hot gates, not the tactics or the numbers, but the spirit behind the stand. They talk about choosing courage when the world feels heavy, about holding steady when pressure tries to break you. And in that simple conversation, the legend lives on. Thermopylae teaches that strength does not always roar. Sometimes it is calm and steady, like a breath taken before stepping forward. It shows that a person can make a meaningful choice even when the outcome seems certain. It proves that clarity of purpose can turn a small stand into something that echoes for generations. The defenders of the pass could not have known their final day would be remembered across ages. They acted out of duty and conviction, not expectation of fame. Because of that, their story became a guide, a reminder that what you stand for matters long after you're gone. Imagine reading about the battle today. You can almost feel the steady rhythm of the shield wall, the determination that held back an empire just long enough to change history. You understand why Thermopylae will always endure, not because of a single victory, but because of the unwavering courage shown in the face of impossible odds. The hot gates remain a timeless reminder that resolve, once given fully, never fades. As the story continued to echo through time, it began to represent something even broader than courage or sacrifice. Thermopylae became a reminder of how deeply people are shaped by the choices they make in the face of pressure. It showed that even when the world feels impossibly narrow, when options shrink, when the path tightens, there is still power in choosing how you stand. Think of someone reading the story during a difficult moment in life. They may not relate to armies or ancient kings, but they understand what it feels like to be overwhelmed. They understand what it feels like to be pushed into a corner, to feel outnumbered by circumstance. As they learn about the hot gates, they realize the message is not about battle, it's about character. Thermopylae whispers that you don't need perfect conditions to show strength. You don't need certainty to make a meaningful choice. What matters is the resolve you bring when everything feels against you. For scholars, the story became a study in strategy and terrain. For poets, it became a canvas for exploring honor. For storytellers, it became a timeless foundation for tales of resistance. But for ordinary people, it became a quiet voice reminding them that even a single stand can ripple outward, influencing others in ways they may never see. Imagine walking the site today. The air is still. The hills are calm. The sea stretches quietly beyond the road. And though the world around it has changed, the place carries a weight, not of sorrow, but of greatness, a reminder that extraordinary things can happen in the narrowest spaces. The hot gates do not belong only to history. They belong to anyone who has ever faced a moment where courage mattered more than fear. As we look back on the story of Thermopylae, it becomes clear that what survived was not the clash of armies, but the clarity of the stand itself. The details of the battle shifted through time, interpreted and retold, but the heart of the story remained untouched. A small group who faced the impossible and chose to hold their ground. Imagine someone hearing the story during a quiet moment, late at night, sitting alone, thinking about their own life. They imagine the narrow pass, the rising dust, the pressure of overwhelming odds. And then they imagine the defenders standing shoulder to shoulder, steady and calm, choosing purpose over fear. That image becomes a reminder that courage is not beyond reach. It lives within small choices made every day. Thermopylae also teaches that unity can transform the impossible into something meaningful. The Spartans did not stand alone. The Thespians chose to stay. The Thebans fought in the final moments. Together they formed a single line, stronger than any one city-state could have made alone. Their collective resolve shaped the future far more than their weapons ever could. Picture visiting the site today. The landscape feels open and quiet. Cars move along distant roads. The sea sits farther from the pass than it once did. Yet something in the air feels unchanged, a subtle weight, a reminder that ordinary ground can become sacred when people choose to stand with purpose. The legacy of Thermopylae is not limited to warriors. It belongs to anyone who has faced a moment where fear felt overwhelming, where the world seemed to push from all sides. It whispers that even in those moments a person can choose to hold steady, and that choice, however small it seems, can echo across time. As the story of the Hot Gates continued to travel across generations, it began to serve as a quiet guide for anyone facing their own narrow pass. Thermopylae was never just about ancient warriors. It was about the moment when a person decides who they are, even when the world feels overwhelming. That is why the legend survived long after the bronze rusted and the battlefield changed shape. Imagine someone reading the story during a difficult chapter of their life. They picture the cliffs rising sharply, the dust swirling, the overwhelming force pressing in from all sides. Then they picture the defenders, steady, disciplined, refusing to step back. In that image, they find something they needed, a reminder that even when life closes in, courage can still rise. The lesson stretches far beyond Sparta. It speaks to anyone who has stood in front of a challenge that felt too big, too heavy, too consuming. Thermopylae shows that meaning comes not from the scale of the fight, but from the spirit brought into it. A single step forward, a single decision to stand firm, can create echoes that outlast the moment. Today, when people walk the narrow pass, they don't come only to remember history. They come to touch a story that has become larger than itself. They come to feel the quiet strength hidden in the rocks, the memory held in the earth. The wind moves through the hills, carrying a sense of calm, almost as if the land itself remembers what happened there. Thermopylae remains a symbol that courage can live anywhere, in a battlefield, in a quiet room, in the heart of someone who refuses to give up. It teaches that a stand made with clarity can shape not only the present, but everything that follows. The story endures because the spirit behind it endures. As the echoes of Thermopylae spread outward through time, the story gained a quiet, almost meditative quality. It became less about the clash of armies and more about the stillness inside the choice to stand firm. People began to see the battle not as a moment of despair, but as a moment of clarity, a reminder that purpose can cut through fear like sunlight through mist. Imagine someone visiting the site early in the morning. Mist hangs low across the ground. The mountains rise in soft shadow. The world is quiet, untouched by the noise of the day. As they step onto the earth where the phalanx once stood, they feel a sense of grounding, not sorrow, not triumph, but understanding. A recognition that courage often looks simple from the outside, even though it takes everything from within. Thermopylae teaches that greatness is not always loud or decorated. Sometimes it is quiet and disciplined, lived in the choices a person makes when no one is there to guide them. It shows that strength can appear in steady breath, in a calm mind, in the decision to stand firm, even when retreat seems easier. The men who fought there did not know they were shaping a legend. They were simply answering the call of their values. And because they did, their stand changed the future, giving Greece the time it needed to unite, to fight again, and eventually to win. Today, the hot gates feel peaceful, almost gentle. But beneath that calm lies the memory of the men who stood in the narrow dust and refused to move. Their story reminds us that courage is not a distant ideal. It is something every person carries and can choose to reveal. As you reflect on their final stand, you begin to see why the story of Thermopylae has traveled through millennia. It is not about how they fell. It is about how they stood. As the story comes to its end, we step back from the cliffs, the dust, the armor, and the echoes of battle. What remains is not the clash of blades, but the feeling the hot gates leave behind. A reminder that even when the world narrows around you, even when the odds tower overhead like mountains, a single act of courage can change everything that follows. Imagine standing at Thermopylae at sunset. The light turns the hills gold. The sea glows softly in the distance. The wind moves gently through the grass. There is no sign of war here now. No shields, no scorch marks, no armies. Yet the ground feels alive with memory, as if the earth itself remembers the footsteps of the men who stood here. You breathe in the quiet and realize the truth. Courage does not vanish with time. It leaves a trace on the world, a path for others to find when they need it most. The defenders of the hot gates did not survive their final day, but what they protected endured. Greece stood, freedom stood, and the idea that a small force united by purpose can hold against overwhelming might became a story passed from voice to heart. Thermopylae is not only a place, it is a symbol, a reminder that strength can rise in narrow spaces, that clarity can appear in moments of pressure, that resolve can echo far beyond the moment it is chosen. As you step away from the story, you carry something with you, a sense of stillness, a sense of grounding, a sense of what it means to stand firm when the world demands it. The hot gates may be quiet now, but their lesson remains louder than ever, because courage, true courage, never fades. It waits for the moment it is needed, and then it stands.